I'm the founder and CEO of Tower Paddleboards, Tower Electric Bikes, and I'm also the author of the 5 Hour Workday, which got published in 2015 and got press in over 20 countries around the world. Today, on today's episode, you're going to learn some interesting stuff. You're going to learn about the power of constraints and stuff we talk about in my book, 5 Hour Workday. You're going to learn about living in a world of monopolies and how to navigate that to not only drive revenues, but to drive profit. We're also going to talk about the concept of 1 + 1 = 11 and why that's the critical success factor in today's world. And you also learn how to expand your view of innovation, especially if you're really having trouble innovating in this sort of environment today. And then lastly, you're going to learn from my personal experience how to survive a $4 million haircut in walking away from Amazon. And there is life after Amazon in the direct-to-consumer world.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty. Hey, would you do me a favor? Send me a note, DM me on one of the 4 social media outlets, and let us know what platform you use to listen to this podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, whatever the app is that you use. I really want to know what it is you're listening to, where it is you're listening from. And we also want to know what was your favorite episode. You can choose whichever one you want. Tell us which one it was, put it in the DM, and I'm going to pick a winner from all the people who participate in this, and I'm going to offer you a pretty cool prize. All right, let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? We all know that very well-established retail stores have closed their doors, but it's not just retail. AI has quickly taken over investment space. Newspapers are hanging on by the skin of the teeth. We're all navigating through this crumbling territory that we may have previously seen as unshakable. So let me ask you, how will you confront and compete against an industry giant? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about philosophers, astronauts, neuroscientists, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, Grammy award-winning entertainers, and some folks you might think you would completely disagree with, who you'll find truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. We always need your help in staying relevant, so please go over to wherever it is you tune into us, and please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. If you are a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are grateful and honored to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. You know, we hear a lot of talk about this thing called the Amazon effect that seems to be wiping out retail, and certainly in the form that we know it anyway. As a leader in your industry, let me ask you, who is the Amazon of your industry? What writing is on the wall that you might be ignoring, and how can you adapt, even if the way to adapt is quite counterintuitive? That's the key. Well, let's find out together, because our guest today is Stephan Aarstol. Now, Stephan was named by Mark Cuban, singled him out to say that the best investment he ever made in the history of Shark Tank was in Stephan. In fact, Jeff Bezos dropped Stephan's name in 2016 in his annual letter to stockholders. The UK's Daily Mail, named Stephan as America's best boss, while the Hamburg, Germany's Morgenpost hailed him as the world's best boss. Stephan Aarstol is a seasoned internet entrepreneur on the cutting edge of direct-to-consumer revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the author of the 5 Hour Workday, Stephan Aarstol. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me on, Bob.
You're very welcome. How are you doing today?
Oh, good.
Good.
It's nice here in San Diego.
Yep, I'm sure it is. So the place I always like to start the show is, in the context of leadership development, what is the question that we should be looking for answers to that we're not? As somebody who is a consultant, an advisor, a guide, I'm often brought in and I'm asked a question, and the reason I don't answer it is because they're asking me the wrong question, right? I can give them the answer, but it's the wrong question. So what do you think is the question we're not asking that we need to ask in order to develop ourselves as leadership and prepare ourselves for the monsters that are coming in the form of Amazons, etc.?
Yeah, I think we're just in a really tumultuous time in the world, and in a very fast moving time. Like the business clock moves 5 times faster than it did 20 years, and 20 years ago it moved 5 times faster than that. And so it's getting to such a speed that it's getting really hard to manage organizations, plan into the future, and do anything like that. So I think as a leader, the number one trait you need to have is the ability to admit you're completely wrong and to completely rethink what you're doing. Because too many people will just sort of stick their head in the sand and pretend what's going on is not going on and see if they can sort of hold out. You want to declare disaster, get out in front of this, and be looking for the next thing.
I love that it's not just the willingness to admit that we're wrong, which is oftentimes difficult for leaders, but the willingness to say, I am going to be wrong. It's kind of future paced as well. And so let's get more information. Let's get better guidance. Let's put the ego to the side. That's a very good, how can I put my ego to the side, admit that I'm wrong, and so that we can survive. That's a really simple but powerful piece that I think is undermined. In the introduction, I talked about how the Daily Mail had said you were the best boss in America. The German newspaper said the world's best boss. Why the world's best boss? what are you doing? Are you giving candy to everybody?
And it's kind of comical because we're a relatively small company here in San Diego.
You're not running.
It's easy to be a big boss with a small company.
Well, no, but still, the world's best boss is still comparing you to all those across. And I'm not saying, I'm not putting you on the spot saying, okay, live up to it. But how did that happen? How did you end up getting that title?
Yeah, I'll tell you where that all came from. It came from this book that we wrote about an experiment we were doing in 2015 at Tower Paddleboards. We moved the whole company to a 5-hour workday, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., straight through, no lunch. And when I rolled it out, we did like a 3-month test in this. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you your life back. But if you can't figure out how to be as productive or more productive than you were before, walking out the door at 1 p.m., you're going to be fired. So I put pressure on people, but then I gave them their life back. And all of a sudden you have this lifestyle where your work day is better than most people's vacation week. Most people don't even get out of bed until noon on vacation, right? Well, you're off work, you got the weekend still. And we did it for 3 months, and it honestly worked so well that we continued to do it for about 2 years. And, I had written some articles, I think in like Inc. magazine or Fast Company over the years. And the first article I wrote about this little experiment that we were doing got something like 10,000 social shares. I mean, it just resonated with people. I mean, everybody sort of realizes that being managed by the clock and working these 60-hour workdays in America was sort of a farce. Like, you know, we have nuclear power at our fingertips now with the internet and all of these technology tools and all of these productivity tools. And if you use them correctly, you can work at 10 times the speed.
Right.
Productivity in the US between 1971 and like 2011 was up 80%. And a lot of people are like, oh boy, you know, productivity's up. You know, I look at that number and I say, that is insane, right? Like it should be up 1,000%, or you're doing something completely wrong here. So, you know, when we wrote that book, we really wrote the book just because those articles did well. And we said, hey, this resonates with our brand. We're a stand-up paddleboard company. We're work hard, play hard, you know, knock off, go surfing. And we said we weren't really living our brand. So we started to live our brand with 5 Hour Workday. And then we wrote the book because we're going to put that in every paddleboard package that we send out to basically, because it dovetailed perfectly with our brand. And then people would maybe pass that on to their friends and say, hey, here's this cool company out in San Diego that's doing this crazy experiment with the Workday. We think it's a cool experiment. So that was the idea. But when we actually launched the book, it went viral, and it went viral around the world. I did probably more than 100 interviews, you know, 5 or 6 national interviews in the US on TV. And then internationally, it took hold in different parts. A lot of places in Europe really just sort of loved this idea. Both those the quotes about the best boss were from a European perspective.
Yeah.
Because in the US,
one was a British newspaper, one was an American, one was a German newspaper, but an American newspaper might say, you lazy bastard.
Exactly. The press we were getting in America, it was so funny. It was so different from culture to culture. In the US, the press I was getting was very hardcore conservative press that brought me in and tried to say, this socialist this is a joke, he's going to fail. And I would have to like spin it on air and get them. And by the end of the interview, a lot of them were like, yeah, well, that actually kind of makes some sense, you know? But in Europe, they kind of loved it right off the bat. And especially like France, they loved it. My friends would joke with me and said, of course they like that, you know, socialistic, you know, nonsense, right? And I said, yeah, that's interesting. But you know who really loves it is Germany. And Germany loves it because Germany prides themselves on being efficient, right? They're a much smaller population than the US, but they're like, I don't know, the 4th or 5th biggest economy in the world. So they're very efficient with what they do, right? So they're not trying to work less, and they're not trying to work 60, 70-hour weeks and get heart attacks. They're trying to do it efficient. And this just, you know, fit perfectly with their ideals. And that's why, you know, it was huge in Germany.
So, you know, I mean, because I think everybody got sort of very attracted to the idea when Tim wrote the book, The 4 Hour Workweek, right? And then we all realized, well, that's a lovely idea. And certainly I think in many ways it's fueled the gig economy, and it's helped a lot of people in that way. But for those of us who run businesses with employees, obviously that's not what we're doing. And though we may have got some great hacks from it, because I love the book, but this idea of a 5-hour work day, I mean, I think that is revolutionary, purely and simply because we only have to, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to look around, you know, just do your own research by just asking your people, you know, how many people do you know who are completely burned out? Most people are burned out. Now then on top of that, you got COVID came in, you got the pandemic, and the pandemic came in. And now we are here as we're doing this interview. It is in the last quarter of 2021, and we are in the Great Resignation, as it's been named, where people are en masse walking away saying, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to do this job anymore. I found that I can stay at home. I found I can do some gigs at home, or I'm just not willing to do 60 hours a week anymore. So in many ways, this book, The 5 Hour Workday, resonates even more now post-pandemic. Are you hearing anything about it in that context, in the context of today being, you know, this great resignation period?
Yeah, there's a lot more interest in this. I mean, the book was published in 2016, and all of a
Right.
sudden there's a lot more interest around it, because what the book did was it put and it was the 4 Hour Work Week, which you talked about. That was a very formative book in my life as an individual entrepreneur. And that
Sure.
was basically opting yourself out of the system. A lot of those same principles are used in this book, but what we're doing is we're applying it to an organization or a
Mhm.
nation.
Yes.
How do you just not get yourself not working, and get everybody else to do your bidding, but how do you do this to an entire organization? So that's really what this book was about. So the 5 hours was a constraint we put on. And the power of startups is essentially constraints. This is why if you have three guys in a garage and you have $100 million business with 1,000 people working at it, you can almost bet the three guys in the garage are going to disrupt them in today's world. And this is because of the constraints. They have no money, they have no people, they have to find a hack if they're going to survive.
Yes.
And they find that hack, and that hack ends up disrupting the larger company, which has zero constraints on it. This is why, government's very bad at business. There's just no constraints built into the system, right?
Exactly.
So the 5 hour workday was an artificial constraint. The pandemic was a forced constraint upon society. Okay,
Yes.
you can't travel for business. Okay, you want to interview somebody, you're going to have to do it by Zoom. Your
Yes.
meetings are going to have to be by Zoom. You guys can't go to the office. You have a restaurant. You can't have people sit down inside. Here's your constraints. Get creative. And that creativity builds productivity, and it builds sort of better ways to do things. So there's a lot of good that's going to come out of the pandemic. I mean, there's a lot of bad that's going to come out of it. But it's a very tumultuous time. And it's interesting. And this is all the parallels between the 5 hour workday and what has happened with the pandemic and remote work is just throw a constraint on something and let's see what happens. And I think what it exposed is that a lot of people were working 60 or 70 hours in the office. Now they're working from home. They're working 2 or 3 hours, watching their kids on the side, and they're just as productive. Their boss has no clue. And some of these people have 5 jobs. I mean, I read about this humorous thing where people are making, $750,000 a year because they just apply for a job, do nothing for 2 months, and just keep applying for jobs until they get fired. And they can work multiple jobs from home, which is a nightmare for the company, right?
Terrible. Because
you can't judge productivity. But this is the world that we're living in.
Well, one of the things we know actually from the research, because I remember having corporate leaders coming to me and going like, we're terrified of this work from home. We just don't know if people are just going to be lazy and not do anything. And what was actually discovered was that people were, on average, it comes up to 23% more productive. Now, if you think about that, 23% more productive while homeschooling, looking after your kids, and having to stop the dog barking or whatever the hell else it is, you've saved some time because you're not wearing pants, but that's about it, right?
And a commute.
So, it's fascinating that this old industrial age thinking is that if you're in the office, you're productive, but it's not true. But let's take that over, because again, it's a constraint. It's a revolution that we had no choice but to be part of. And then you've got the other side of that, and that constraint is there are the constraints given by others, i.e., let's talk about this Amazon effect. You were a darling for Amazon. As I said, Bezos talked about you in the stock holders letter, shareholders letter. And then you stopped doing business with them. Talk to us about the Amazon effect and the impact on you and what you guys did with it, because it was counterintuitive.
Yeah. So, and this has been an evolution, right? Like they did a case study on tower paddleboards selling on Amazon at Harvard. And that was published, I want to say 2014, 2015 or something like that. And I go back and I sort of talk, well, they present that case to the class, then they do questions or whatever. And I did that for a period of about 6 years. And my position towards Amazon is completely switched. And in this case, they talk about 4 different ways to work with Amazon. Don't work with them, sell through them, there's 4 different options. Each of those options was the correct choice at a different time in a period of 6 years. That's crazy how fast the world has worked. And in the most recent book on Amazon by the guy who wrote The Everything Store, Brad Stone, he's sort of the big author that writes about Bezos. He's got about a page in there, and my first quote in there is talking about how Amazon is this great company that really cares about brands, and my last quote is Amazon doesn't care whether you live or die. And really, that's how far their position has changed. Right. And so it's incredible, and it's not just Amazon; it's the internet world today. And I first saw this back in like 1999, working for this internet portal for the radiology community, and we went from startup 7 people to dominant industry leader in like 3 years, where we took over. It was a news and information and education portal for that industry. But we went from nowhere to disrupting all of the trade magazines to basically having a monopoly on that market. Wow. Everything in the internet world tends towards monopoly. You have Google having 80%, 90% market share, Amazon, everything goes towards monopoly. And that's very dangerous, because the sort of the advent of the internet was sort of the disintermediation of the middlemen.
Yeah.
Like
shareability,
everybody got out of the way.
The idea of democratizing this possibility, really. And it's become, in many ways, an industrial age, like where you had 3 or 4 people who were at the top of that game. And that's what you've got now with Google. You've got, as you said, with Facebook, with Amazon. It's like these guys own everything.
Yeah, it's made the entire world like a little tiny town, and you have one big company that runs everything. It's interesting. You'll see how China reacts to this. Like China is because they have their own little monopoly called China, right? And over there are 1 million people.
Little monopoly, just little.
And they don't like other monopolies. So they just shut these things down, because they're like, we know where this leads. In America, we're like, we want to be, democratic and a free market or whatever. But it's swung so far that the government does have to go in and break these things down, because there's starting to be really bad, repercussions from these monopolies.
So you did something. So you were, like we talked about, you were in there. You talked about Amazon being this fabulous company who cares about brands, and now they don't give a shit and whether you live or die. So it's a complete flip. And you were doing business with Amazon at. Can you tell us the numbers? When you
yeah. So we
want
started
people to have context.
Yeah, of course.
For what this was really like.
We started in 2010 as a company. I think the first year we did like 3,000 in sales or something stupid. We kind of started at the end. The next year we did $250,000 in sales. The next year we did 1.3 million. That was like our 3rd year in. And in that year we did 250,000 on Amazon. And we had just got onto Amazon that year. So it was already, 15, 20% of our revenue, but first year out. The next year we did 3.1 million total in the company, and we did 1 million on Amazon. So our Amazon sales grew 400%, right? The next year we did I think a little over 5 million, and we did like 2 million on Amazon. And so now Amazon's like 40% of our revenue. The next year, and that year, actually, when we did 5 million, we were named the #1 fastest growing private company in San Diego. And we were number 239 on the Inc. 500. We were growing at such a rate and it was largely, it was a small company, like 5 people, but we were leveraging the reach of Amazon, where at the time, Amazon was a dirty word by a lot of retailers for a different thing. It's like people are buying our products and they're selling it on Amazon. And I was like, well, this is kind of the future. It was disrupting retail. As Jeff Bezos likes to say, I didn't put you out of business. I'm just delivering the news to you. It's happening. And then the next year we did 7.5 million, and probably about 4 million of that was so. And that's the inflection point where the Amazon revenues were bigger than our own revenues. And I started to get worried. Obviously, you got this one big customer, if something happens there. And at about the same time, about 2016, Amazon, I think, went to the dark side. There were always 2 sides within Amazon. There was Amazon retail, which operated like a Walmart, where they would buy products and they would sell them, and they would undercut your MAP pricing, and they would just sort of abuse you. And then there was this marketplace where you could set your prices and do stuff like that. And Amazon took about a 15% fee.
Mhm.
And today, in any of those marketplaces, Amazon takes about 50% of your revenue, not just from the fees, but they force you to advertise because it's a very crowded marketplace. So we've basically gone end around right back into retail, and none of the sort of the savings of globalization, the fact that we can make a sneaker in Asia for $3, and it sold 120 in retail, direct to consumer started to say, hey, we'll sell this sneaker for $20. That was there for a while, and then it disappeared because now we're back to retail. You got to buy it through Amazon. It's $120. Amazon takes 60. The sneaker company, we're just back to retail.
But, at 4 million in sales with Amazon, you jumped ship.
We walked away. Yeah. And we intentionally walked away.
Mhm.
It just, the writing on the wall was that, they were taking more and more, and now you're going to have to advertise. And every year, and this is like in any advertising, any online marketing that somebody finds, it works
Mhm.
great for a couple of years. And then marketers find it and it gets ruined. And then it gets really expensive. It's like, pay-per-click in the, 2000s, even before AdWords existed, we were doing it for a cent a click. And
Yeah.
now, like, you can't even make it work for most businesses unless you sell some kind of scammy product or there's a huge margins on some kind of supplement or something, So we saw Amazon starting to go down that path. And it's funny because a lot of people today are all like, oh, I'm going to start myself an Amazon business. And I said, man, that ship has sailed like 3 or 4 years ago. The only person who makes money on that is Amazon. And you can
Right.
drive revenue, but you can't drive profits. And profits are what you need in a business, like a long-term sustainable profit. That's just hard to do.
But
So that's why we walked away.
you walked away, and you did the thing that nobody would say is right. So I have a friend who 2 years ago started a physical print magazine,
Excellent.
and she's done super well. It's completely counterintuitive, right? Because, like, are you mad? Right? Like, nobody's printing magazines, and she has a very high-end magazine. It does very, very well. You went counterintuitive, and you went retail. You bricks and mortar. Are you on crack? What's going on?
Well, we didn't necessarily go to sell to other like retailers. We just did direct to consumer ourselves. We
Mhm.
said we're going to drop our prices about 30%, because we kept having to creep our prices up to accommodate this increasing Amazon margin. And we called ourselves a direct to consumer company. And I kind of considered Amazon at the time like a hybrid retail, because they took,
Sure.
15%. It wasn't Keystone markup where they were taking half. Now they're taking half. I've jacked my prices up. I'm not really a direct to consumer company. I'm just a retailer that doesn't sell in, Walmart. I just
Mhm.
sell on Amazon. So we said, that's not the future. We dropped the prices by 30%. We continue to sell on Amazon. We just threw our prices up high enough to cover their costs. So it was like, 30% higher to buy on Amazon. Still today, 10% of our sales go through Amazon. And what that tells you, they're buying a Tower paddleboard. The only other place it's sold is on towerpaddleboards.com. And they're willing to pay, 30% is not a small amount on this product, another $150 to buy that through Amazon. And they're not even like, oh, could I buy this direct from the brand? 10% don't care. And you know why that is? It's because Amazon is a convenience store. It no longer is the best price, the best deal. It's not concerned about consumers. It's not concerned about the brands. It's just a very convenient way. And I love it too. I'm very price insensitive though. A lot of people they care. They want to, if they can save $100 here, $100 there, they'll do that.
Of course.
But that's kind of what we did, is we got away and we went more direct to consumer, and we cut our costs down. But we took a haircut of 4 million in revenue in a very short period of time, and that almost wiped us out. Some other things sort of happened at the same time. We were diversifying. We got into electric bikes with Tower electric bikes. We started a beach club, which is an event space. So we could office out of this event space. So we would pay zero rent, basically, and collect rent instead of pay rent. And so, that's the name of the game now is, okay, you're in this tumultuous world, get your burn rate to as low as you can and try to survive. Because if you can survive and organically build a brand over 20 or 30 years, I think those direct to consumer brands that can do that are going to be the ones. That's the future.
So I want to talk more about that when we come back. We're at the end of part 1 here, because a lot of people might be feeling like, oh, I'm being killed by Amazon. I even sold some of my stuff on Amazon. I was threatened by them. I sold stuff by them. And now I can't even afford to do business with Amazon because they're killing me on the other end. And I want to talk about what you're seeing as writing on the wall for not just retail, but for business. Like, what is the writing on the wall? I want to come back to that, talk more about that in part two. So I want to thank you for being with us for part one. If you have been enjoying, well, not if, of course you've been enjoying this. Yeah, you've been enjoying this conversation. I want to make sure that you know how to get hold of Stephan. And here's how you get a hold of him. We're going to ask Stephan to tell you all about that. And of course, we'll make sure it's all posted in the show notes. Stephan, when you tell people how they can find out about you, about your products, and about all your wonderful resources, and of course, about the book.
Yeah. So, I'm pretty easy to find on our websites because we are small companies. Our things listed there. You can call up the number and talk to me. So towerpaddleboards.com, towerelectricbikes.com, the Tower beachclub.com, and our new sort of everything direct to consumer showroom, nomiddleman.com. So you can find us on there. Social media, our primary social media, we're not too heavy into social media, is Tower Beach Club. And that involves the entire beach lifestyle brand of Tower.
Fabulous. Thank you. Well, we'll make sure all of that is posted. And again, for you, dear listener, thank you for joining us for part one of the conversation. Stay tuned. We're just one click away from part two. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. See you in one click.